Hi, welcome to What's Next, the interview series from Balderton on deep tech. My name is Suranga, I'm a partner here at Balderton Capital, and today we're going to meet Salar al Khafaji. Salar is a serial entrepreneur. Previously, he founded a software company called Silk, which he sold to Palantir, and then more recently, he started a robotics company called Monumental. Monumental is focused on the construction industry, so today we're going to learn about how robots can lay bricks. Hi, Salar. It's great to have you here. Welcome to Balderton and the offices here, and also to What's Next, our video interview series on deep tech.
Thanks for having me.
I guess, what we're here today to talk about is your latest company, Monumental. You're one of those rare things in the European ecosystem, a serial entrepreneur. But I want to hear about the whole journey, but maybe we can start with Monumental and maybe just tell us in a few minutes sort of what Monumental is, what you're building over there.
Yeah, so with Monumental, we're trying to do autonomous construction robots on site. So our kind of like long-term vision, like I'll give you the kind of sci-fi version of this, is we think it's going to be possible to have a big truck pull up at a big construction site, all kinds of small robots emerging from it, and then autonomously working together, coordinated by software and AI, build a beautiful house or other building in a short amount of time, at a very affordable price, at a much lower cost than what we can do today, and also beautifully, like without going into like some like base level of like everything has to be the same. Our takes basically like the technology is there. It's obviously like very hard to do this, right? This is kind of like years out, but like we also think it's not like a completely intractable problem. It's not a hard tech problem in the sense that we're trying to do nuclear fusion, right? Like there's no like physics breakthrough that we require. It's just like a lot of really difficult engineering. So that's kind of like the vision. And what we're doing today is we're focused specifically on bricklaying in the Dutch market. That's kind of our go-to-market, our starting point. So we're building kind of a vertically integrated company where we're acting as a subcontractor. We're delivering like the end product, the walls or like the facades, building them with our own robots, with our own software.
Makes sense. So just let's talk a bit more about the selection of that particular vertical, I guess, or that particular market. Robotics feels like it has the promise to revolutionize a lot of different physical industries, and there are many, many different ones out there. What was it that drew you to construction in particular? Like, why did you sort of think that was the problem that's worth solving right now?
So honestly, there's obviously like a very personal layer here, right? Like I've been interested in construction, infrastructure, and like architecture, urban planning for like years. It's just like a latent kind of like interest that I've always had. But I also think like when I started thinking about what to do next, I knew a few things. Like I knew I wanted to work on a big problem, and for me, a big problem was something that say unlike my previous company, which was more of a B2B SaaS company, I wanted something that could be kind of like almost expressed on a GDP level, which immediately gets you just like into a few big categories, right? Like you could talk obviously about like beyond construction, like energy, education, healthcare. Like obviously there are many big categories, but from those, I think what drew me to construction is again a personal interest, but also this fact that out of all the industries you could pick, construction is actually the one that has seen the least productivity growth in the last century, right? So there's like economic ways to look at this. You can just like look around you, but that in terms of like how fast it is to build, how expensive it is relative to like current wages to like build or just like buy property. And I think if you contrast it with other industries, manufacturing or like it's actually like a shocking like difference over like compounded over decades. And so I felt like the need to actually fix that industry or like to try to fix that industry is much greater compared to all the others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that means it's interesting. Yeah, no, it's one of those industries that if you look at the makeup of the people who do it, for example, like high immigrant levels, which is a classic sign of somewhere where that people are trying to drive costs down without any kind of fundamental productivity gain, right? So you're trying to find cheaper and cheaper workers and so on. And at some point, that doesn't work, right? At some point, that gives. So it's an interesting area to attack. Can I, like, if it's okay to go technical on this, the focus on bricklaying is interesting. Like on the one hand, it makes perfect sense. It's a more finite, more specific problem that you can solve. But then the other thing that I feel like I'm aware of in the world of construction, and I'm hardly an expert, is the idea of prefabrication, right? And I know that there are a lot of people who believe in building sort of entire walls offsite and then being able to bring them on site and assemble. Whereas I guess bricklaying is something which happens on site typically. So Are you competing with that idea, or is that not related? Or
No, to some degree, like I think, for example, as say an investor, you can't like you should or can make a bet if you're thinking about construction robotics or construction innovation. If you think like prefab or modular is going to be like 80% of the market in a decade, you should probably not bet on us. Um, so actually, interestingly, I don't think it's primarily a technical question in terms of like engineering or how. For me, our starting point was actually we want to do on-site construction. So the starting point is actually more of a kind of like go-to-market question, which I think why did so many construction companies fail in the last decades? And I think part of that is because they tried to change too many things. So the analogy I actually give is if you think about just traditional enterprise sales, right? Like I think everyone would acknowledge that's hard on its own, right? Like you have all these stakeholders you need to manage. That's part of the whole thing of doing proper enterprise sales. If you think about construction, it's like the worst form of enterprise sales because you have all these stakeholders, but they're actually not even within the same company. They might not even like each other. So when you're changing something, like say introduce prefab or modular, some new component or even new materials into like say 3D printing of homes, which I like as a technology, by the way. It requires you to get sign off from the architect, from the end customer, which might be like a developer or whoever. It's obviously the general contractor and other people involved in the construction, regulators, right? Like whoever, like local kind of like building codes. And so we basically didn't want to do all of that. Like I basically wanted to figure out a hack around that. Like how do you not have that problem? And the way to do that is to actually be very conservative and to be like, we're going to plug and play into the existing process, which A means like your business model needs to be tuned to that, which is why we basically pretend to be a subcontractor, but it also means you just want to plug and play into something that is already a big market, like has a big market size. So for some people, it feels like a very kind of like weird, like why aren't you not doing like cross-laminated timber, which is a cool new technology, 3D printing, right? But that's the main reason. It's actually not technology.
okay, that's really interesting. And so it's really like sort of step back, look at the overall sort of economic journey of construction, find a piece of it that is big, but that is sort of somewhat self-contained, I guess is what you're saying. And then you can define the outlines of that and saying, right, that's the problem we solve on day one. Obviously, in the long run, we're going to do a lot more, but on day one, we solve that problem.
Yeah, and where you can again like plug in
Yeah.
and not have to convince like convincing one party, right? Like selling to just one person is hard on its own, like especially if you're an early stage startup. I think just having that instead of having to convince like a whole bunch of stakeholders.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And then what's interesting is that within that sort of fairly well-defined focus that you have, beyond that though, you're doing everything, right? So you're genuinely full stack.
Yes.
So let's just talk a little bit about kind of what are you doing in house and what have you brought in from elsewhere, and just how full stack are you?
Yeah, so we're like completely full stack in the sense that again, like we're even acting as the subcontractor, right? Which allows you to like also hack a few things, which we can also talk about. But so we're building our own hardware. That was actually not something we just decided to do. Like we initially like thought maybe we could just buy some robotic arms, but then due to some like peculiarities of this market, like it made more sense to actually build our own hardware, which obviously is hard in some ways, easier than expected, in some ways harder than expected. I guess we're building our own, but of course we're just sourcing. You know, what does building your own hardware mean? We're just sourcing a lot of existing components, combining them in novel ways, right? So we use I think cameras, sensors, actuators, typical to like I think any other kind of like robotics or hardware startup that we source. On the software side, again full stack. We've built our own stack that does everything from like inverse kinematics to like motion planning to like 3D reconstruction of the construction side. And we use a lot of open source components for the machine learning, machine vision stuff, but it's all kind of like custom tuned, fine tuned for our use cases. Not a lot of people have trained data on a construction side or like on bricks before.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just let's talk a little bit about your personal journey on that, because your previous company, Silk, was what I would describe as a sort of classic full software company. So I think in the data analytics area, and you can explain more, but this feels like a very different kind of problem. As you say, it's in a much messier. I mean, I'm a software engineer, computer scientist myself, and what I always loved about software is that you kind of control all the elements, right? It's a beautiful little world where you get to be God to a certain extent. Whereas now you're out there, outdoors, dealing with actual physical objects on sites, which I'm sure are never quite what you thought they'd be when you were designing it in house. and you've had to go into different areas, right? I mean, learning about bricks, learning about hardware and robotics, computer vision, etc. So just I don't know, just on a personal level, what's that journey been like?
Honestly, mostly fun. It is incredibly hard. So let's start. Like I think you're completely right. Like I don't think there's anything to disagree here. It is much easier to build a software company. What I would say though, which is maybe an interesting kind of perspective, is I'm a technologist at heart. Like I started my first company as you say, like Silk was a data visualizations analytics company. I think what's interesting about like I think this is a common pattern in that let's say the more common like SaaS or whatever like software companies, maybe consumer marketplaces, the technology is relatively easy, uh, but all the other stuff is really hard. So like just selling, getting users to use it, getting retention of like all of those things. And I think every like founder, like whether you're natural at sales or like product, everyone struggles with this part, right? Like it is always hard. And uh, with like hard tech, it's kind of like I think the other way around. Most hard tech companies, I think by default have a very clear market need, right? Like we're not really struggling. Like I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about how do we sell our product. Like it's basically like if it works, people clearly want it. Like we have enough signals for that. And so in a way, it's easier because we have very complicated technology problems. We have this messy kind of world to deal with. We're dealing with hardware, as you say, which is relative, like quite new for me. But they're all technology problems. And I'm very comfortable being like in kind of a technology problem world mostly. Beyond kind of like just having to think about sales and BD and all the time.
That's actually a really interesting point, right? I mean, ironically, a lot of venture investors, understandably, focus a lot on the tech in the company they're investing in. But I mean, to your point, for many traditional enterprise software companies, the tech's almost the easiest bit, right? And so having an obsession with, tech founders and people who have a strong technology background, you need those things, of course, but those things are almost a given. The question is, can you also sell? What's the product look like, etc. Whereas in your world, as you say, actually you get to really focus on the technology itself, and that's where you're going to win or lose this battle, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe a bit about the team that you build around that, because I know you're still a fairly small team, but maybe you could talk to us a bit about how many people you have, what the different disciplines are, and how you get them to work together.
Yeah. So we've been growing. Like we're close to 30 people now. So the team is growing after raising Series A earlier this year. Um, I think maybe worth start like I'll go into kind of like how the team's organized, but I think that one interesting thing to think about what kind of company are we compared to maybe some other similar companies is we made a very conscious or like we tell everyone when we're recruiting is this is an applied technology company, like applied AI, applied robotics. We're not trying to do like foundational research. There's obviously nothing wrong with that. Like I'm very happy that those companies also exist and we need them. But this specifically is kind of a company that's trying to bring a product to market as quickly as possible and to kind of iterate very quickly, which means that the kind of people we hire, and this is especially on, let's say, like mechanical engineers or like machine learning talent, is we're trying to look for people who are kind of like more tinkerers, love kind of fast iteration speeds, and not the kind of people who are like go deep on a new model or like kind of like research direction that might take them like 6 to 9 months, which again like is something you need if you're probably working say OpenAI. You definitely need that. So I think in terms of traits or the kind of like culture we're building, I think that's a very important part, and I think you need to be very clear about what kind of like hard tech company you're trying to build. In terms of the team, we obviously have a software engineering team. It's small enough now that I just think of it as a software engineering team. And that again, we have people with like machine learning or controls experience, like expertise, but everyone's actually full stack. Like if you're a machine vision engineer, you're probably also writing code that's not about machine vision, right? Like the infrastructure to support it. Like we're not big enough we want people to kind of be generalists basically. We have a hardware team, which is mostly like mechanical engineering, mechatronics, and one electrical engineer, but we're growing all of these right now.
How do you encourage that full stack approach? Because I find that with maybe it's just me, but like with some deep tech companies, it can be really hard to convince someone who's a computer vision expert that actually no, there's nothing wrong with also doing a bit of regular software engineering, right, or vice versa. And so I don't know, culturally, how do you push that through?
I actually think that's kind of like almost on the recruiting layer, right? Like you actually have to find those. And so when we interview like machine vision people, for example,
Yeah.
obviously they're smart, right? Like if you're doing machine vision, like you like, I think that like a lot of kind of like baseline things have already been cleared. So for us, it's actually like trying to find people who are not too academical, too kind of like, I just want to do, if you just want to like train models, that's again totally fine, but this is not the company for you. So I actually tell everyone, we part of being at our company is you get to like run your own code on a robot, which either excites you, or like if you're like someone else should do that, again, not right now this phase, that like not the company for you. I try to get everyone on a construction site like in real life at least once a quarter, right? Like we really want them to see like the kind of how the product is deployed. And I think we, people select into like getting very excited about that having a lot of kind of autonomy and being able to like shape all these things. So, but it's not for everyone for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really interesting point you make about asking that question and defining it really at interview, right? This is the kind of company we're building. If you don't want to be in this kind of company, that's fine. Like there are lots of other great companies, but don't come here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That I feel like that's a very second time founder realization. I feel like
Right.
with a lot of first time founders, you're so desperate to get the talent in, which is completely understandable, that you just hire a lot of very smart people. And sometimes it's only later you realize you've hired people who are smart, but maybe not the right person for this particular challenge.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I'd actually say, like, to your point, like my biggest lesson compared to like like my first company with Silk is, I think I try to move faster on almost everything except hiring. Like we do move fast on hiring in the sense that we try to like, but I spent so much more time on hiring. We spent so much time thinking about everything from like the interview process to like what kind of cultural traits we care about, what kind of like. So yeah, like 100%.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean everyone is very quick to say that people are the most important thing in a tech company, which is sort of like an obvious, almost cliche. But then the sort of opposite is kind of true as well. Like if you hire the wrong person, and that's actually the biggest problem in a tech company, right? So it's really important that you get the right people in. So I want to dig in on this idea though of being on a building site, because having I haven't spent a lot of time on building sites, but I've been on one or two in my life, and they seem like fairly chaotic, fairly messy. And we're talking about the Netherlands here. So just like Britain, lots of rain and mud, I'm guessing. I'm sure you have the design of, okay, this is the perfect wall we're going to build. This is the size of the brick, etc. But then you go on site and I'm guessing it's never quite what you thought it was going to be in the lab. How do you deal with that kind of messiness right now? And I guess I'm asking the question at two levels. One is the technology itself. So to what extent does the robot know what it's going to do before it even turns up? And to what extent does it have to react, I guess, using computer vision and so on? It's based on what it actually sees and comes across when it gets there. And then secondly, from a team point of view, like how do you guys, if you're a full stack contractor or subcontractor effectively, who goes on site and how do you run that process?
Yeah, those are great questions. Those are really good questions. That's kind of almost the core of what we're
Yeah.
trying to figure out. So maybe to start with the second part. I think one thing I've actually learned from my time at Palantir, which acquired my first company, is they instilled this culture that I thought was very unique. Of there's this culture of forward deployed engineers, despite it not being for construction sites, but still like where they would write like field reports on their visits to the customer side. They would explain, and they would actually distribute that quite widely throughout the company. So that everyone can kind of like, whether you're a product person or a business development person, or understand kind of like the challenges uh, at a customer side. And that's actually like, we're trying to kind of like instill the same type of culture where we try to capture as much data from any kind of site visit, whether it's with an existing deployment like we're running like with a customer, or just something we're scoping. One thing we found is it is messy, but it's still to some degree a constrained problem. What I would say, part of this you can also solve by just having like a clear segment, right, that you're focused on. So what we're not doing is kind of like, renovations in the city center of Amsterdam, which, just like in London, right? Like that's kind of probably the hardest thing to do. I don't know if you're ever going to do that, right? That's kind of a market on its own. But when you look at like a new development, like say terraced housing, like in a kind of suburban environment, again, it is messy, but there are a lot of commonalities that you start seeing, the way it's organized, and
It's a pretty
ultimately
well-defined problem,
it's
I guess,
well
right?
defined,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then like ultimately, keep in mind, it is messy, but trucks have to be able to navigate it. Forklifts have to be able to navigate it, right? It's already made for like some kind of like
Right.
a mechanical equipment. And so plugging into that kind of like infrastructure, and I do like with air
Yeah.
quotes, but
Yeah.
it's like it's not like impossible either. So that's kind of like, I guess, the So yeah, it's like some of those things go into like the core of the product. So as you know, the base hardware that we built is this autonomous ground vehicle platform. Uh, AGVs are like a commodity now, right? Like any kind of like, but we made it custom for our use case. So obviously that includes things like leveling legs that allow you to go level at any, like whenever we need to be level. We obviously cannot assume the surface is going to be that. You
Right.
need to build. So like we've built all these things kind of into the core of the product to like deal with that, with those variations.
Building sites are a particular physical, sometimes messy reality. How early in the company's journey were you going on site and actually testing what you were building out there, and how much did you have to iterate from that very first version?
Yeah, so that was like something we wanted to do like from day one. And in fact, I started going to construction sites before founding the company. Like
Right.
before, that was kind of part of my scoping or learning process. Uh, um, and we've actually captured like I think tens or hundreds of hours of videos of like masons working, like just to understand like what they do. We went with our first prototype within a year of starting the company, which is really really fast. Um, it wasn't the prototype, it was premature in many ways, but still that was the point was not to deliver the wall, it was to learn as much as possible. And like one example of the key things we've learned is that site topology is like a big challenge, like beyond just like the wall you're building. Like how do you get there, what do you do if there's like a piece of rebar sticking out? One other thing I'll mention, which I think is true for more companies than this, more hard tech companies, is I think a general lesson in startups, which is a very good lesson. Talk to your customers, talk to your users, right? Like everyone should do that. But I think what's interesting, I think it's true for us, but also say for like a self-driving car company, you can't just talk to your users. Like you can't just like interview a driver or interview like a construction person. You really have to observe. And there's like so much tacit knowledge that they don't think about. Like they will never be able to articulate like why they do everything they do.
Yeah.
So you really have to like be there, pay attention, be like, wait, why are you doing it that way? And you get this kind of like, so you really need to be in that mode, which is a different form, like very different from like normal interviewing or like normal customer kind of discovery.
I think it's a really good point. I mean, in a way, the beauty of taking on as complex a sort of context as the one you're taking on is that kind of it's obvious from day one, right? Like we need to be on site, guys. We need to actually see what this looks like. Whereas many software startups, I find, can be a little bit abstract and theoretical about it, right? So they'll do a few customer surveys or questionnaires or whatever, and then they'll sit in a darkened room and build the perfect piece of software, and then they'll tick it out there. Whereas what you're saying is like go live in the shoes of whoever it is you're trying to help or trying to work with, right?
Yeah,
And really,
yeah.
make it real. It's very cool. And maybe if I can just double click on that a little bit, how do the construction workers react to the robot coming along?
Yeah, that's a very common question. I
Yeah.
think it honestly it varies. It's like so generally I think that construction workers I think are kind of like a universal breed almost, right? So normally it's mostly jokes, right? Like they're actually like not hostile. They just love to joke about it. It could be any type like and especially given keep in mind most of the side visits we've done so far are kind of still in R&D mode. So like you have your robot. It's actually not like running 100% of the time. There are like 3 engineers around it. So it all looks quite unproductive to them, right? Like they're like, all these highly paid guys that look like they've never been on site before. And that's fine, right? Like we're totally okay with that. I think one thing that is exciting, and I'll share one anecdote, but like what that's really exciting to me is the majority of bricklayers, for example, in the Netherlands that we meet, ultimately once they see it working, they tell us that they're very happy to see something like this happening because they're seeing that their kind of like craft is actually disappearing. Like they're very aware of the labor shortages, the fact that young people are not going into this profession anymore. The average age around them is going up really, really rapidly. So they're very aware of that. One of the first projects we've done, we've had like the head mason who was initially kind of like skeptical. Like he was like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And then once we actually like were working, and he actually got his retired dad to come a couple days after, showing him and actually talking about it as if it was like look what we're doing, right? Which is one of the best kind of things you could get. So I think that like those things make me very happy. But yeah, it's got to be like a journey, right? Where people are still getting accustomed also to like just something new on site that's doing this stuff.
You've got the robot today that's doing the bricklaying. What's the eventual scope of the machine you're building? What can it do on a building site, and what can't it do on a building site?
Yeah, so two things to that is one is what kind of building site. So we think we'll stick around with like new construction. Like we're not going to go into like, you know, renovation into tiny apartment buildings. I think that's like a completely different set of like challenges.
Yeah.
And the other one is, of course, like what kind of trades are we going to do? And so we think everything that looks like bricklaying, which is for us like picking up a dimensional object, knowing where, like, what it looks like, placing it in the right place according to the plan. Um, you know, our estimate is that it's like roughly 30 to 40% of the labor involved in a house. So there's other types of blocks. There's like window frames and door frames, maybe some roofing elements, but it's not 100% either, right? Like we're not making that claim. We're not going to suddenly do plumbing or all the electrical wiring or all kinds of like. So I think that's also something to be aware of, right? Like we're not going to suddenly like address 100% of everything that needs to happen on a construction site.
Yeah. Because you're right. So something like plumbing or doing electrics is a totally different problem physically to picking up an object and placing it somewhere. Yeah. And then how does this affect the job situation? So, you know, we talked a bit about this earlier, but, you know, in the end, are robots going to replace humans on building sites?
Yeah, so I think it's actually worth even understanding like what is the problem we're solving today? Why would even people care about what we're doing? And the reason people care is mostly because of the labor shortage, right? It's actually like we're replacing jobs that are not being filled. That's actually what we're trying to like do today. And that gap is becoming bigger and bigger every year. And so the reality is like the labor shortages are so severe across like, you know, at least Northwest Europe. I think the market that we know well, UK, Germany, the Netherlands. It's it's very, to me it's generally unlikely that robotics will grow so fast and do so many tasks that will put anyone out of work. Just the challenges in like renovating homes for like, you know, for whatever like green programs every country has, the amount of construction that needs to happen. It's just like there's not enough people to do it, including like with robotics kind of rising.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier that you raised your Series A earlier this year. Can you tell us a bit about fundraising? What is it like fundraising for a deep tech company in Europe?
Yeah, so it's, I think that the good news is, the obvious challenge is, you know, if you could kind of like define an addressable market of VCs, it's, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's probably like a fifth or maybe a third at best of like what it would be for like compared with a software only startup, right? So there's like a whole pool of VCs that will be like, this is cool, but obviously, you know, we don't do hardware, we don't do robotics, we don't do construction, right? In a way, we're like many Venn diagrams of things people don't do, which is not great. What is good, what is exciting though, is the VCs who are like into like who are comfortable doing some of these, taking some of these bets. Um, I think for them, there aren't a lot of high quality companies out there either. So once they see something that seems to make sense, you do get kind of like, you know, high quality conversations. So in a way, again, I think it was not like an easy fundraise process, but I also feel we wasted way less time compared to, it could also be obviously experience or like timing, compared to other fundraisers I've done before, like, you know, where I've helped other founder friends or, and I think again, it's because you're not just like, your first week is not like I'm pitching like 60 VCs. There aren't 60 VCs that want to talk to you anyways,
Yeah,
and that's fine. I think you just need to be aware of that from day one.
yeah. So quite focused, and so in that sense, almost efficient.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. And maybe a little bit about your journey generally, like through all of this, because so there you were, seed and at Series A, pitching a robotics company, having previously built a software company. How did you get into tech at all in the first place? And you know, how did you end up? Why do you think you ended up taking on this kind of problem? Because it's a very different kind of problem to the one you started with. Right?
So I think, you know what, I think one reason, so let's start with my personal journey. So I started coding at age like 9 or 10. I never studied computer science. I studied physics, and I actually thought I was going to be an academic initially. Like my goal in life when I was like, if you'd probably asked me at age 15, was just become an academic. And then while doing my master's degree, I realized like academia was definitely not for me. But I was doing all this stuff on the side because I was programming, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I kind of got a taste of like, you know, the speed of it, like how quickly you could do things, how quickly you could achieve things, the autonomy, right? Like that's actually something that people don't think about a lot, that you get even at a young age, and that really excited me. So that's kind of how I got into my first startup, and I basically had to learn, all the fundraising, building a business, all like generally the hard way, right? Like it
Did
was not.
you didn't start your company straight out of college, did you?
I
Or
did,
you
yeah,
did?
yeah,
Oh
yeah, I
wow,
did, yeah,
okay.
yeah. So I actually dropped out of my master. So basically, I was like, I was doing this. I was working at this agency in the Netherlands, and I on the side built this prototype, and a lot of people got excited about the prototype, and I started thinking about how I could kind of like build something around it, and that was kind of like the start. It wasn't like Silk yet, but it was kind of like the start of that journey. The first person who joined me to help me was my still current co-founder, Sebas. So he was still in college doing computer science. He's actually done a proper degree.
Yeah.
And it was like, I want to finish, but I can help you on the side. And that's kind of how our collaboration started. He became like the first employee at Silk.
When you did that though, so you dropped out of your masters
Yep.
basically. Was that a common thing to do in the Netherlands at that time?
No,
So
very uncommon.
what was that? Yeah, what was that like, taking that risk? I
It
guess?
was. I think like many people who've done this, I think the way I sold it to myself and everyone around me, which everyone I think knows from the get go, is that I deferred. Right, like it's like I didn't drop out. I was like, let's try this for a year, and I can always go back. And everyone told me like you can come back in a year, like it's totally fine. And I think even in hindsight, I knew that was not going to happen, even if it didn't work out. But it was like, yeah, I don't think it was a very common thing. I still don't know if it's a common thing. It's like a trope in, Stanford or like Silicon Valley. But I'm not sure if it's like a very common thing in the Netherlands.
Yeah, yeah, and it's an interesting point. So you said that you were programming from the age of 9, and I think so. I also started programming when I was about 9. So when you're a kid programmer, you're a tinkerer, right? You're sort of writing little bits of code, and they do little things and so on. Then you did physics, which in my mind is always more abstract. It's more high level. It's a big picture science. And then you became an entrepreneur, which has a bit of both of those things, but it also has all these very day-to-day things, right? Like selling and marketing and fundraising. What do you enjoy from all of that? Like, what's the bit that really turns you on or switches you, gets you up?
Honestly, I think one of my biggest surprises is all of it, right? That's why I'm doing it again. So I think the just building products and building the company around the product is actually just like an incredibly gratifying experience for me. And so once you have that mindset, I kind of like I don't mind, like all the work is fine, like to me, right? Like I don't think anyone really like, I can't believe anyone would enjoy like fundraising as a fundamental like kind of thing just to do, right? Like but when you're doing it because you're doing it to like raise funding for the goal you have in mind, right? Like it's obviously for a reason. Like that's super, like that's exciting, right? Like, and you're actually like telling your story, selling your story. So I think like that's been that was actually one of my biggest personal surprises when I was doing Silk, because I felt like that was the thing I just had to do. But I was totally fine doing it, and I didn't feel like, oh, I just want to like stop doing this as soon as possible. Or and I've also learned, I guess, that I'm actually quite good at it, right? Like it's one of those few things where I'm pretty sure I could find like thousands of people that are actually better CEOs than I am, right? Like I have no like ego there. It's like I don't think I'm amazing, kind of like but I think especially at the early stages, when it's like really about selling a vision, explain to people why this works, whether it's like candidates, like for recruiting VCs, customers. I think that's kind of like, that is the founder's job.
Yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, here at Balderton, we always say we want to back founders who we believe could keep doing this for the whole, for the whole journey. Obviously, that doesn't always quite work out. Things can change, but one of the reasons is exactly as you say, like that founder connection, the connection you have with the problem, is very, very deep, and it's just a very from that base, it's easier to be more compelling around selling that vision to whoever it is, right? Whether it's a customer, whether it's an investor, whether it's an employee. So that makes a lot of sense. And tell me about the transition from your first. So you built Silk up, you sold it very successfully to Palantir. What was the journey like in between the two startups? Did you take time off? Did you go straight into this one, or?
Yeah, so I spent a couple of years at Palantir.
Okay.
One thing that is maybe worth mentioning about, and I actually really enjoyed my time at Palantir. Like it was actually a great kind of learning experience to see kind of like a top tier Silicon Valley company from the inside, pre IPO as well. Like I think that was a really great experience for me. But also, like I spent some time with a lot of industrial customers there, which was also great. Like that's like everyone who even knows Palantir like mostly thinks about the government side. But they actually had like customers like Airbus is a publicly like known one, where some Airbus planes are actually made with panels, like the planning of it. So that actually got me kind of like a sense of like, the interaction of hardware with software. Um, and then I took about a year and a half off, traveled with my then girlfriend, now wife, and then COVID hit, which was obviously unexpected. So that kind of added some like chaos to the mix. But that was kind of like the in between phase. And I think I took the traveling was kind of set up to be like thinking about what I wanted to do next. And it became very quickly clear to me that I want to do this, like be a founder again. Like I don't want to kind of like go to say investing or like full-time investing. And I also knew that I wanted to do like a hard problem again, like going back to how we started this conversation. Like, I didn't feel that motivated to do another SaaS type of company. Um, uh, and I really like, and obviously everyone will tell you, like, I think a friend told me, like, friends don't let friends start hardware companies.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
I
was
like
very
it.
aware of like, what I was getting into.
Yeah,
But it was still kind of like very exciting to me
yeah.
to attempt.
I love that. That's going to be the quote of the show. Friends don't let friends
Yes.
start hardware companies. So but you did start a hardware company. You've been on a journey there now, and like bringing us completely up to date. Very excitingly, right now you're literally building your first sort of full villa, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so like so basically, kind of like we've been, I think we're close to our 3-year anniversary, so it's still like early in our journey. We basically, first year and a half, we were doing pure R&D, and then since then we've trying to do like increasingly bigger projects, like actual projects where we deliver walls. And the first wall was like a tiny piece, I think, for like a shed, and then like bigger and bigger. And we recently started doing full corners, which obviously you need to do like a full house instead of just
Yeah,
like a tiny. And
corners are
now
important. Yeah,
corners are important. Actually, like, in software engineering, you talk about corner cases, edge cases.
yeah.
Like for us, they're very literal,
They're
right? Like they're
literal edge
not some
cases.
analogies. And so we've started figuring out all these, corner cases,
Yeah,
and then also going up, like to do full 2 stories, and all of those things are coming together. And so we're doing our first like full villa. And those are like real commercial projects, right? Like we get paid for them. We're working. The buildings we've done so far, like the walls we've built, like they just stand. People live in them. People look at them, which is actually like an amazing
that
thing
is
to
amazing.
actually
Yeah.
to accomplish even at this stage.
I mean, that is actually really special, right? Because in the end, shelter is one of those very fundamental human things. So the thought that you've built a machine that provides shelter is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I agree, and that's actually something we tell everyone, like in our onboarding too. It's like it's not just about, uh, you know, I think it's very, um, it's very gratifying, and I think actually one of the things that attracts a lot of software people to a company like us to do something like have something tangible. So that's true for every hardware company.
Yeah.
But in our case, there's like the second layer, which is the hardware is also building something tangible.
Yeah.
Uh, and the thing that we built potentially will still be there in like 100 years. And that's something I actually like. That's actually really, really special. There aren't a lot of things where that's true. And that actually like it almost feels like a privilege, right? That you're allowed to build something that will be part of the built-up world and then be there for decades or even longer.
Yeah. No, it's a privilege, but also a responsibility, I guess, right? You've got to do it really well.
Absolutely, and that is actually part of the point, right? Which is
Yeah.
like we care. There's this bar that we need to clear, which is the general contractor has to say, good quality. You did a good job. But we actually, like, I personally care that we even go beyond that, right? Like, if we're gonna build up things for the build up environment, I don't want to be like, oh, we had this phase where like robots were building shitty, cheap but shitty buildings around the world, and that's kind of like I really don't want to be responsible for something like that. So we really care about like the quality of what we deliver.
Yeah. And so when you think about, so you're out there building your first, 2-story with corners building. What do you need to evidence or prove before the next big phase of the company, whether it's the next fundraise or whatever? What's the big goal in, I don't know, a year's time or 2 years' time?
I mean, for us, our internal goal is to kind of like go out of the kind of R&D hybrid mode which we're in,
Sure.
and go into like operational mode for the basics. We'll continue obviously doing R&D and do more new things, but I think like that's like my kind of internal. So having like a team of robot operators deploy the robots without a lot of maintenance or a lot of like and have them kind of like build with the productivity numbers, like our internal kind of like metrics of like, number of bricks you want to lay in a day, etc. Those are all the things that need to be right. And like one thing I didn't say is be able to build a good wall. But that's something we've kind of like, we think we've cleared now. So that's kind of like something we've already accomplished, and that was an important earlier milestone. I think when it comes to like a future fundraise round, I think we're fortunate that we don't need to like immediately fundraise. Like we've raised like kind of like I think that's actually kind of important when you're doing hard tech, because there's so many unknowns again in your journey. You have to like build a different buffer, I think, compared to like a software company. But I think most investors would probably say something like, I want to understand the unit economics of like a deployment of a project, right? Like what does it look like? How is it going to improve over time? And I think, you need to do a couple of projects at least, like full projects, full like
Yep.
developments to have the data points to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, to be able to credibly state
Yeah.
that, right? Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. Deep tech in general, you have to raise more than you think you need to raise, because there are always unknowns. And then the other interesting thing, I think, which you've also referred to here, is the sort of non-standard proof points, right? So what you have to almost create for the investors, right? Here's what I'm going to achieve by this point, and this is why you should then invest at that point at a high valuation, which is very different to a software company where it's straightforward. They just measure your ARR and apply a multiple to it, and the rest is maths, right? So very cool. Final question, if I can. We've talked a lot about Monumental today, and fascinating, intriguing company. And to my point earlier, I think it's and like you said, there's a real privilege in the fact that you're building a company that is not just building tangible physical products, but which themselves build tangible physical, hopefully enduring products. But if you look at robotics and deep tech more broadly, if I can ask you to do that, what's another area that really fascinates you, that you think is really moving interestingly?
I mean, honestly, I think like the next decade is going to be so incredibly exciting. Like it feels like almost every major industry has to be touched by automation, robotics, and AI. And so I personally spend most of my time, thinking. I think like everyone's probably thinking about like the Chat GPT kind of LLM side, but I think like the whatever you want to call it, like embodied AI is I think the phrase that's being used a lot now. But I think that's kind of like, so whether it's like in defense tech or agriculture, or again like and also construction, right? Because construction, it's like 10 to 15% of GDP. Like I think even in our kind of my wildest kind of like what could Monumental become, there's going to be space for multiple kind of like big construction robotics companies doing different things. So I think like it's actually hard to answer that question for me, because it feels like there's going to be so many exciting opportunities out there. On a personal level, I'd love to see. I think that's actually slightly harder. I think like B2B robotics is going to be easier than consumer robotics, but I think the kind of like Jetsons, like just having kind of your household robot that could whatever, like fold up your laundry or do like that. That seems like something like I still hope to see that in our lifetime, right? Like that seems like something we really need to get. And if I think we've never been this close to it.
Yeah. That feels like a great place to stop. Thank you, Salar, again for coming in. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.